welcome to We Mortal Coils. We're joined today by Trevor, Michael, and Bray. I'm Steph, and we're doing a podcast with some ethics and some, political philosophy today. I posed a question. I can't remember how long ago. How many days ago was it?
That wasn't that long ago.
It was like 5-6 days, I think.
Yeah,
Maybe a little less.
5 or 6 days ago. I don't feel like with my background, right, that I know enough about what people refer to as maybe the welfare state. And so I come to my fellow philosophers to see what that means to them. And maybe we'll talk about what it means to me. But what I'd really like to end up talking about is what is the future of government responsibility? So maybe what does that look like? Or maybe what should it be, etc., etc. And so, anyway, we'd like to go around and introduce ourselves. Trevor, how are we doing?
Doing good. After some microphone, headphone troubleshooting, I actually was able to get on. Appreciate y'all letting me postpone to this afternoon. We were initially planning to do it this morning, and then I realized I had a thing about psychedelics this morning, so I had to go do that.
Was it like a seminar?
Yeah, like a just a bunch of people that meet up for coffee every Sunday morning and discuss stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Today we had the psilocybin expert. He came in, so I got to cajole him for questions for an hour and a half. So it was fun. But yeah, appreciate y'all rescheduling. I am excited for this topic on account of how I'm excited to hear what Bray has to say.
And I think that's what we're all here to do. Like honestly, that's what we're here to do. In light of recent events, just poke Bray about it and watch.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to tease apart social contract theory and then, like, pragmatically, what does the real world actually look like in execution?
Sure. Introduce yourself, Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael.
Very well.
Sometimes I'm
well
on this.
Done.
Sometimes I'm not. I try to at least provide some helpful input during the discussions.
For sure.
And I like being here.
Well, Ray, what say you?
Hi, everyone listening to our podcast. Thanks for being here. I'm Bray, and I have a lot of strong opinions about the responsibility of the federal government. So you'll probably hear a bunch of those on this episode.
Yeah, pretty major asterisk for the whole episode. We're talking about the U.S. government pretty exclusively.
Yes.
If we start talking about something else, it'll be explicated. But like most of this is in reference to the U.S. government.
Right.
Sure.
Which is a good point to bring up, and that'll be probably something that I mention. Matter of fact, I was just mentioning earlier how I was closing reading on this book called The Second Bill of Rights, and one of the last few passages that I read, there was a little bit of a blurb about the difference between an extremely developed country like the United States and what they could be obligated to provide for their citizens versus a much less developed country, and what would be reasonable to expect from a government of that size and capability. So good bringing that up. Yes.
So Trevor, quick question about the podcast. I don't know if you have this data, but like, do you have an idea if, like, how big is our U.S. audience versus everywhere else? I'm just curious. Do you have any idea?
How big is our what audience?
Like,
in the United States.
United States audience and then everywhere else. Like, how do they compare?
Oh, I haven't looked in a while. I'd like to say it's virtually all United States, and then like
I'm sure it is.
Every now and again, there's a smattering of people from like New Zealand or something.
Sure.
And just some random bend and ripple in the algorithm that finds its way into somewhere else. Either way, whoever's listening to this, if anyone is listening to this, we appreciate you listening to this.
Yeah,
right.
From wherever it is you are. And if you do find yourself interested in expanding on this, like for example, if you're like a European and you're like, oh well, these Americans, they don't really understand what it's all about, especially from a perspective of someone who does live in a place with a lot of social welfare.
We invite you
Please
on.
leave.
Come on.
We invite you on.
Right, please.
Leave a comment, and we would reach out. Maybe we could we'd love to have you on. And we could discuss this kind of stuff more formally with someone who has an actual phenomenal experience of this sort of thing. It'd be very helpful.
For sure. Well, like I said, I'm your host, people, and slight commentary on what we do here. I really enjoy coming together with these people, and we would love to hear from other people, of course. And so, if you enjoy, this kind of content, try to push it. So anyway, we start. What is the welfare state? I've heard about this. I feel like since I was like an itty baby, just like ever since I was a child, I've heard, older people than me talk about, the welfare state is corrupting the nation, stuff like that. I mean, I just don't know what it means. Like, I know that some people out there have lived with like actual and reasonable thoughts about, government responsibility other than the ones I was raised with. And so I would like to probe that kind of understanding.
Bray.
We've got one vote, Bray.
Well, we're running right into it. So, okay. So the welfare state, as I understand it, is basically a system of, to use language that Trevor has used in the past, safety nets, or perhaps social programs. It's basically systems that exist courtesy of the federal government and by extension its citizens to support those people who are less than well off in the society. And I think a lot of that was developed, if I'm not mistaken, in the last century, meaning the 20th century, or at least a bulk of it. Social Security is probably a very large one that comes to mind when you think about social programs that exist. Another one is things like food stamps, or even I would even go so far as to say this is something that even Kamala Harris was running on this past election cycle, where like first-time home buyer like credits. If you were buying a home for the first time, then you got a basically a boon from the federal government to assist you in that endeavor. But I mean, as far as what welfare means when people typically consider it, I think there's definitely a stigma associated with the idea of essentially, a lot of people look at it like you are mooching money off of the federal government. That, maybe, and this is almost as far as I'm aware, an exceptionally American ideal that people who are on welfare are lazy or inconsiderate, or they're not driven, or like or perhaps even a more quintessential American ideal that if they would just pick themselves up by their bootstraps, get a job and work, they wouldn't have to be on welfare. But I don't look at it like that. In fact, I look at welfare programs, or at least the essence of welfare programs, which is providing necessary goods, like the base necessities for survival. I look at that like the government's responsibility. And while that's not actually reflected in the United States on that level, like you can't point to any citizen on the street and say, yeah, it's the government's responsibility for them to make sure that that citizen has, is guaranteed basically the amount of food, water, shelter, et cetera, that they need in order to survive. I mean, it's not quite like that here. And I'm not really quite sure it's like that anywhere, but I think as the discussion unfolds, we'll see that it may be more about what we are striving for rather than what's really set in stone about what is law, so to speak.
Sure. So, like, I would like to contextualize an example that would really help the audience understand maybe what you're talking about. Would you agree that food programs in this country are actually like an agricultural subsidy from the government.
Our food programs an agricultural subsidy.
Mhm.
So, can you elaborate a little bit on that because of what I said earlier?
Right. So I'm not trying to beg the question or like beg an answer or something like that. I'm trying to, establish something that, maybe the audience could really, grab onto.
Sure.
And so that might be the food programs we have in this country are, you know, you get excess, things like dairy. You know what I mean? You a lot of times you get more dairy than you know what to do with.
Sure.
And it's a subsidy from the government to farmers.
It could be the case, yeah.
So that particular one, I do have some trivia on
Mhm.
the dairy excess. So that I believe. So there's a whole thing about there was some act passed early in the 1900s, early to mid, that effectively may have been a Depression era thing, but subsidized dairy farming, and we wound up with an excess of milk production, and they were basically just running it down drains because the supply was just too great. And there are a number of other like agricultural subsidies that effectively caused this kind of food wastage, even modernly. But and so if you recall, I believe was it Reagan era? When was the government cheese thing a thing? That's connected to this.
I can't remember.
The government
So-
cheese, yeah.
So that was part of someone's political campaign. I can't remember if it was Reagan. It was definitely like a Republican who was like anti-welfare platform, and one of the core components was like government cheese, right? So that actually comes from they have all this dairy that the government is contractually obliged to purchase, and so for a time, it may not be the case anymore, but for a time, there was a conversion that was occurring of the excess dairy into cheese wheels, and then that was being stored in cave storage
Mhm.
by the federal government. And because of the like protein and nutritional nature of cheese, it actually made sense at the time to push that out as a sort of welfare benefit.
It looks like that was Jimmy Carter that started under
Okay, interesting.
in the 70s and early 80s.
Well, in general, I think we can all agree that, the government buying, food and handing it to the poor, right? More or less, the farmer gets the money that they need, and then people get what they need to eat, right?
Sure.
And so it's stimulating on both sides. And the reason why I'm getting this ball going now is because I'd actually like to bring up a clip later, but more on that later. All I'm trying to get for you to help me with is like give us an example of something that the audience could really understand, something that they could see every day.
Mm-hmm.
Of what you're talking about. Like you said that the government should be obliged to, provide for our absolute necessities. What
Right.
You talked about first home buying, but that's a once in a few year thing that maybe a lot of our audience don't really know about. And so what about something else, something someone ever sees every day?
Right. So this may be a good time to sort of mention. I was just saying before we started recording, I think that I had just finished reading Rousseau's Social Contract, which isn't quite as related, but does have some tie-ins. But I'm almost finished reading this book about the Second Bill of Rights, which, quick background, was almost proposed by Franklin Roosevelt back in the 20th century as essentially an additional set of rights that every American citizen would be entitled to, that included anything from a job, and not just any job, like a job that actually like provided things for you and was beneficial for you in more than just an instrumental way, as well as, things like an education, sort of basic fundamental needs that is not enshrined anywhere still today. But basically what I mean to say by I feel that the government should be responsible is things like, for example, and I, I'm no legislative maestro or anything like that. Like I can only say so much from my speculative point of view, but it seems to me that the United States, being the richest country on the planet, the most or so-called greatest country on the planet, you would think that that would come with benefits as being a citizen, at the very least, including something like government guaranteed health care, which is a very, we were speaking earlier about Europeans and how they may have a very different conception of this question. And many countries in the EU have national health care. It's something that I've had direct experience with, although not fully. I've studied abroad 3 times in Europe, and every time that we go, we always have these meetings beforehand in which they explain, if you ever need any sort of medical care, there is national health care here that covers you. If you need something, let us know. We will take you to a hospital. We will bring you wherever you need to go, and it will be taken care of for you. And I'm like, that's fantastic. I've never had to actually use any of that, but it's a benefit of everybody in the country paying into the system that provides for the general well-being of everyone there, including people who are not citizens. And this is something that was really surprising to me reading a lot of this stuff in the Second Bill of Rights, was that there's so much history regarding even just what the United States federal government should be obligated to do, or even state governments by extension, to people who are not actually citizens here, which is a strike. And I don't mean to stop you, Trevor. I just mean to say that it's a striking thing today, when it seems like our administration is like, yeah, if you're illegal, just get the hell out of here. And so, but yeah.
I have to say, I mean, in an ideal world, that all sounds, I was about to say, in an ideal world, that all sounds ideal. It sounds great.
Sure.
But like, I just don't. I'm not going to say it's impossible, because it's not. It's absolutely not impossible. It is in fact feasible that a country, and it is so that there are countries that can afford this sort of thing. But it sounds incredibly difficult. Like I'm just speaking of healthcare now. But we do necessarily, if we start getting into this whole welfare thing, you expand it to cover other things. But as far as Americans are concerned, like, we usually speak of healthcare. So like the idea of being able to afford, via our taxes and that sort of thing, taking care of the healthcare of every American, as well as any like Tom, Dick, and Harry that comes into our country, I just don't see how that's like fiscally a responsible move, like long term. I don't see us being able to afford that, generally speaking. But I have to say, this is just my intuition, but it does feel like a strange. For me, it's a scary thought, and I'd have to see some sort of numbers, like something from Europe, for example, that could support that. Would be something that would be wise to do long term.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, my only contention there is that it's like, even if you just took healthcare as an example, like if you turned this sort of, and for one, just to go out on the record and say, as though I haven't said it a million times, I think for-profit healthcare is an absolutely despicable practice. I think the concept of taking human beings, fellow human beings, and saying the only way that I'm going to look after your well-being, your health, is if you have the money to pay for it, on an individual basis, is a despicable practice. Like, I just don't agree with that at all. And so, like, even if you just took healthcare and you said, here's the United States, and arguably more money flows through the United States than anywhere else on the world, or at least it's in the top list of places. Like, I can't imagine where else does more money flow through than the United States. where else are people generating more money than the United States? This is
To my understanding, there is no other place.
right. It's
You
like,
know,
and then
like
it's well, we can't provide national health care for the citizens of the United States, or even by extension anybody who is residing here. Like how is that even conceivable?
Okay,
that's all I mean to say.
That's
is
a good
that
question.
I mean
That's a good question. We've definitely like gone through some examples, right? So healthcare, food supply, housing, you know, very basic, bottom of the pyramid, Maslow's hierarchy kind of stuff, right?
I'm
I
very
don't
glad you
know.
brought that up, by the way.
Yeah, so I think that's gonna be relevant to like kind of where I want to drive things. So um, kind of the structure of the questions or the overall like where I want to drive things is governments effectively are like concentrations of power through wealth and resources, and the idea of owing something to the citizenry other than to keep them compliant or in line is relatively new. But it doesn't mean that it's incorrect. It just means that it's relatively new. And I would argue that we now modernly do have the resources, the logistic capabilities to fulfill that kind of government. Now, welfare, right? That word means like what? Like when we talk about the welfare state, are we talking about just social programs, or are we talking about programs that also provide for businesses in order to bolster the country's economic system?
Well, that's a very good point to bring up, because in this country, there's no. So, and there's a whole lot of layers to this sort of thing. But for example, and I was just thinking about this morning when I was making my coffee. I almost thought about sending a question to the Discord because I was scrolling on some social media waiting for my coffee to brew, and saw something about it's like this old recurring meme about some business owner increasing the price of like bottled water and ice cream because it becomes really hot outside. And I was just pondering about the ethics of that sort of thing. And I'm like, imagine if a private business was the only place that you could get access to like bottled water, or like the majority, like 75% of your water was sourced from a private business. It's like suddenly you're in a very particular position where you are almost completely beholden to a private business and whatever price they want to set for something you need to survive. And I'm very stood against something like that. I'm very averse to something like that. But as far as welfare goes, I think at least in the context of the United States, because we do have a capitalist system that relies a lot on private businesses and things like that. I mean, you could probably consider welfare to include things that benefit private businesses.
Okay, so all governments necessarily exist because there's a citizenry, and then there's people over those citizenry that make decisions about how resources are used. Like, more or less, I would call that a government. Maybe you'd have like differing ideas, but
Sure.
this divvying up of resources that are like pulled up to a top and then redistributed, that exists even outside of the American system. Like that's even in a feudal system, that's how that would work, right?
So I kind of want to introduce one thought to all of this. So I'm usually, I suppose you could pull it just from all the conversations we had so far. I'm usually pretty against. I wouldn't call myself a libertarian in any sense, but I do sometimes like think towards like the less the better. I don't generally trust governments to be able to handle money very well. I don't think that there's as much accountability as there are in like a normal like private enterprise, let's say, because a private enterprise in an ideal world would fail. I mean, we could talk about like the 2008 housing crisis, too big to fail situation. But
or the COVID funding.
or COVID funding. So this basic like notion that like I usually approach the situation as the government's not really positioned to handle money very well. Therefore, the less the better, except for necessities such as housing, or not housing, but except for like firefighting, primary education, and all that.
You drive
However,
directly at
Go ahead,
what
go ahead.
I'm trying to drive at.
right, there's somewhere I'm going with this, and then I'll end. I do believe that things change. Things are changing all the time. We have to recognize the fact that it is currently 2025, and one day it will not be. It'll be 2125, and then 2225, time and time and time. So there was a time when food and resource and energy and all of that was so sparse that the idea of providing bread, like a EBT or whatever it is you want to call it, to the entire citizenry, or the entire population, I should say. It wasn't always that everyone was a citizen. The idea that you would supply that to anyone who needed it, which we do here, is quite incredible. Is quite different from most times in history. So you should. It's worth recognizing that, and the same thing's true for providing for a primary through high school education and the rest. So I kind of want to introduce this whole equation, and I'm trying to basically extend the olive branch to you, Bray, about this conversation. When I say we really should recognize that as time goes on and like the centuries go by, as a civilization, it'll become more and more easy to acquire more and more commodities. So,
correct.
For however much energy you put into the activity of acquiring corn, let's say, it used to require tilling land with an ox to acquire X amount of corn, and now you can use it with a tractor and get quite literally 100, like by a factor of 10 more than work done in the average day, and things like that only become easier and easier. So it's worth recognizing, and I think we should introduce this part of thinking to the equation, that as time goes on, the idea of having like healthcare or universal basic services, like Bray, you often say, all this sort of thing into the equation does not. I don't see it as inherently wrong or dangerous in the long term. In fact, it may very well be necessary.
Sure.
It's just one of those questions. It becomes somewhat of a math problem at this point, not a political one, but a math problem, where we lay down the numbers and we go, "This is what we want. Great. Is it feasible given all of the material here? Does the math allow for it? If we set up the pieces, does everything fall in order such that you would be able to do so?" And I think that's more or less the conversation that we're having every single year when it comes to like working with progressive policies. It's just conferring with the current state of affairs, with the ideals of progressive politics to make those sorts of changes. And that's more or less what the tug of war happens. That's what the tug of war is between like progressive and conservative politicians, usually. I think we're in a weird era right now, but
we're in a very odd era.
Yeah, we're in a very odd place right now. Being a conservative doesn't. Yes.
So I would like to unify actually what all three of you have talked about. And I mean, if I examine my phone notes, that you guys mirror my phone notes. Like one or all of you are saying the things that come in more or less the order that I was thinking them out earlier. I mean, I'm very happy the way this has gone so far. The question becomes, right? If we live in this like super modern industrialized age, with all this crap, all right, with all this stuff, okay, Bray says that the vast majority of humanity should be able to benefit from that industrialization, not just like seriously this many.
Right.
Okay. And so, Trevor is saying, more or less that by what vehicle do we move this, industrialization to the vast populace? And I would like to actually address what Michael was talking about earlier as well. I addressed it with my students in the past week. I, put Maslow's hierarchy of needs up on the board, and, we talk about it. And so I got to thinking with them, we have at the very bottom, the needs that you need the most, right? Those are, physical needs. shelter, food and water, and so on, right? And then what's above that? I actually put safety above that one. That's more or less how it goes. And think about it, people. I would like to pose this question. Bray is saying that we've got all this stuff, and Trevor's saying, okay, well, we've always kind of had this idea that the government provides safety. But Bray might be asking the question for Michael, why doesn't the government provide for something below safety?
Correct.
It doesn't make any sense. Why would we provide up here before we provide down here? You can't have this one before this one. And that's actually the central, question to, that I was trying to pose to everybody. And I'm happy we've arrived to it.
You can.
So here, let me do this really quick, Trevor, before you say this, and I'm going to go ahead and do this because I've got a bit of Maslow's hierarchy of needs up just for reference. And the bottom of the pyramid is physiological needs, like Stefan said, and that includes food, water, shelter, clothing, sleep, the capability to breathe, which I guess you could extend to clean air. And just above that is safety and security, which includes your health, employment, property, family, and social ability.
And so therein lies the law. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
The law has always been enshrined in this country. We're a very lawful nation. By and large, we have an adjudicated rapist as a president, but, we're working on it, okay? And so anyway, the law will catch up to him eventually. I have faith. And so why would, that's what I'm trying to say. Why would we provide for safety before the one below it? But go ahead, Bray.
Oh no, I agree. Like as far as safety and security is concerned, we seem to funnel an awful lot of money towards our local, state, and federal police organizations. And in fact, we funnel a hell of a lot of money towards our national security organization known as the military. We seem hell-bent on that. However, we have no national guarantee.
In an age where democracies don't fight each other.
Correct.
We've got a trade war with Canada right now, but it's not an actual war. And it could never be one unless, things were really, really out of place. And unless one of those powers was no longer a democracy, even.
But looking at this, like, I have no national health insurance. I have no there's something to be said about property. Going back to like I said, the social contract, a lot of that book is premised on the fact that a government exists to basically mete out property rights. And then, of course, going down to physiological needs, food, water, shelter, I have no government guarantee of those things. I have government assistance in acquiring those things, but I have no guarantee. And then of course things like clothing, sleep, breathing, those are sort of more niche things in the context of the conversation. But my point being is that in an ideal world, to me, it seems like every citizen would have the equivalent of food stamps and be able to show up to the grocery store and say, hey, here's my card, here's my government SNAP card or whatever you want to call it. And I'm trying to get groceries for the next 2 weeks or for the month or whatever, and I'm swiping my card, and here's my allotted credit from the federal government for an amount that. Yeah, go ahead.
I
Trevor.
don't mean to.
No, go ahead.
Well,
I could rant for days.
I see. Well, for that, I will disagree with you on this one. I will put to you that I would much rather so there are two different areas here we're talking about. There are two different categories of this whole welfare thing. Number one is people who take this money because they need it, whether they're missing a leg, they have severe need, in which case they get this X amount of money per month, EBT, whatever it is. And then the other instance is everybody gets X amount of money provided by the government. Now, I would rather personally, instead of giving the government $300 a month and then receiving back from the government $250 after paying for everybody it took to run the logistics of this thing, I'd rather just keep the $300. So I personally see a need.
Time out.
Well, yeah, that's going to need.
Is the reason for that because you yourself are not secure?
I am secure, therefore I don't need anyone to give me anything.
Well,
I think we can
But if
make
you were
space for
equally
that.
secure in that system as well, then your concern over financials would not be as great, I would argue.
No, because I want to accumulate money. That's what I want to do.
For
I
what?
don't because I want to own land, because I want to be able to afford sending my kids out to have an education, so I can
If
buy
those are
nice
taken
things.
care of, why do you want more money?
If those are taken care of,
Mm-hmm. If you
See,
exist in a world where
this is
the concept of wanting more money becomes kind of just, well, you're just playing a game at that point. Why do you want more money?
well, I
If
would.
that 250 is sufficient to provide education, health, well-being at a very good degree, why do you need the 300?
Okay, well, now we're taking it somewhere. I don't think it. I
That is the long-termist kind of
I
viewpoint.
understand
I see
what
where you're
Michael's
going.
saying.
You're creating a sort of Star Trek sort of environment now. Like I'm sort of seeing it. Well, because you are like literally, this is just the next generation. Like this is that world, that environment where like somebody works as a waiter and it's not about the money. They just like the romantic lifestyle while living in Paris. Like it's not, nobody's paid anything because it's not about money. You can always generate food and whatever it is you want out of pure energy, and it's just not a concern. So I see where you're going in that sense, but I just don't see that as possible. Like it just doesn't make sense to
Do
me.
you not see that as possible because it doesn't currently exist, or because you fail to see where the gaps that it has are filled
Oh,
in?
it's theoretically possible. It's just that if you create a trajectory of where your mind can go, like where I project the future from this point forward, as to my thinking, there's never going to be a time where we just are finished like expanding out across the stars, or we're finished doing this, that, or the other thing. And for that reason, I don't really see.
Yeah, that's too far out. Let's dial that back.
Well,
Say 50,
you've
100 years. Say that. I know you took it to next generation. I just said if you lived exactly right now, but you had a surety that you had access to a home that was nice, or at least decent, not shitty, and you had access to basically all of your fundamental needs
I would
plus.
I would
I
like
like.
to help Michael's
I don't even
argument
want to
out
toss the
real quick.
qualifiers on it, but
I just want. I would state to that, like, and this goes all the way back to
Well, real quick.
your very first one.
I don't get to do
Oh.
this often. I don't get to help Michael often. You know what I mean? So just as an example, a very good example that someone could latch on to what Michael just said there is, in this country, the number of available homes dwarfs the number of homeless people. But why can't we get them in some homes? I mean, like it completely and totally dwarfs it. It's my understanding it's by orders of magnitude. So why can't we get them in homes?
I see that's another conversation. To bring it back over to Michael, and then we'll
I really
go back
don't
to
think
that.
it is a different one. So Michael is saying that
Uh-huh.
in this world of total excess, why do we have people?
We live in post scarcity. There's not a single thing you can describe to me that is some sort of
that's what
one
I'm
or
saying.
two or possibly even third level
something
Maslow
on the
need
bottom of the pyramid
that is not in post scarcity for us right now.
Everything. That's what we're trying to say is that something in the last week clicked in my brain. Just one more, because it was already coming into place, has been for a long time, and it just got one more click closer. For me, I was just like, why do we live this way? Why does it happen? And so I'm happy we're exploring this together. That's I just wanted to say that real quick.
It's not a happy theory.
Okay, so first, I would argue that there are two different things we're discussing. I think they're very related, but I don't think they're the exact same thing. Stefan, what you just got into there is like the bottom of it. Like, why doesn't the bottom give out? Or why does the bottom give out? Why can't the bottom be lifted up? There's this situation at work. All scarcity is artificial, that sort of thing. Why can't we fix the fallen out bottom of this situation? So that's one question, and it's a genuinely good question we should get into. The other thing that I was interested in that kind of touches on what Michael had like brought up is like, well, why do I want more? Like, why do I make 250, but I want to make 300? Why do you want to make 300? Well, that's a different question. And I think it's very related, and it might connect to all of this, but I do think it's a different question. It's this question of like, well, why people at the bottom? And then the other question is why people at the top? And I like, why aspire for top? And also why have a bottom? So that's, they're all related, but they're not the same thing. So I would say, Michael, to your initial question, the one you gave to me, like, well, why do you want the 300? Well, the short answer is personal reasons.
Well, I would say
don't see
insecurity, right, of acquisition of those base 2 levels mostly, as well as subsequent levels, right?
You're going to have to explore that a little bit.
So you literally gave me an immediate answer, which was you want to make sure your kids can go to school.
Yes.
Right? And so I would put that probably at the, I'm not looking at the pyramid, but it's probably like 3 or 4. I don't know what education
For what?
would, Maslow's pyramid.
Oh, it goes from physiological needs to safety
not
needs,
safety.
love and belonging, esteem, and then self-actualization at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't even put education on that chart. I feel like that's orthogonal almost. But
I actually was talking to my students just real quick, and I told them that there was nothing in the building that didn't belong at the top. Everything you learn that's abstract belongs at the top. The self-actualization thing, that's education.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that without the bottom.
I would say it's worth noting, as obvious as it may seem, before Trevor, you continue, is just that money as an item itself is valueless.
Like, yeah, it's totally made
this
up.
Right here.
Well, sure, yeah.
This right here has no value except by its relation to what it can purchase for me. And so the accumulation of this is worthless except for the fact that I can trade it for things that I want or need. And so what we're talking about is, say, hypothetically, that my needs were more or less taken care of. Suddenly all I'm left with to trade this for is want. And now we talk about what is defined by that want. What constitutes an individual's want? Because there's an argument to be made. Why does Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, et cetera, why do they have this passionate need to continually accumulate more and more and more and more money?
They have dragon sickness.
It's not about the money.
It's not about the money.
It's about power, but they have dragon
about power
sickness.
And expression of the will in the world.
Yep.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to. They are highly agentic, and they're well positioned.
I'm surprisingly vibing with Michael. But
I completely understand why they do what they do. It makes complete and total sense. If you have the resources and the drive.
So Michael, I like to imagine it as insulation against nature. That they are insulating themselves so far away from the laws of entropy, for example. They have all these procedures done in their bodies and things like that. All this massive healthcare, blah blah blah.
I kind of want to disconnect. This whole this point of view from that from the whole production of money to some other things as well. I don't think there's something necessarily wrong with wanting to become the world's most renowned author, for example, or wanting to become the world's best guitar player, or a chess grandmaster. I find these to be expressions of goals, aspirations, power and will, as you say. And I don't think these things are negative. I think you quite literally, these things I think are actually quite beautiful, to have these sorts of aspirations and goals. And I think that this is only just one attribute of them. And
right.
I think
so Trevor, then the question directly becomes off that.
Please.
Why do only the wealthy get to do anything that you just said? That's what I'm talking about. In this massive industrialization, in this massive world of excess, why do only the people with the most amount of fake crap, dollar bills, get to have those goals? Right now, I'd like to post some data for people.
I think wealth is a lot of things in relationship to what you just said. I think wealth, first and foremost, is in fact that negative not first and foremost, but one of the things that it is in fact this negative thing, this thing that you've applied a negative connotation to. Bray, for example, like this thing that it's based on taking from this person or etc. Like I do think it is that, but it's also an expression of other things as well. So, for example, it is also that as well as an expression of how many people are interested in your books. I mean, look how many people purchase them. That's one manifestation of wealth. It's in a sense your ability or your productivity that you can offer to the system at large. It's not always that,
Right,
but that
why,
you can't
does
just
it,
say that
but
that's.
why does it take
never
money
is that.
to engage with the system at large? But why
Because
is
that's
it?
the intermediary we've agreed upon.
Well, no.
Yeah, it's an
why-
intermediary of power.
What do you mean why?
Essentially.
You're asking
what I'm
why,
trying to
but
say, what I'm trying to say is that
Mhm.
this is all rooted in the idea of equal opportunity, and it doesn't exist.
You're talking about the idea of welfare.
Well,
For
I
the
think
idea
what he means to say, and this is something that I talked to Trevor about while I was visiting in San Francisco. I was like, and then I may be going off on a tangent here, but perhaps it's beneficial to the conversation. Is that consider any conception of wealthy people that you've ever encountered, and you almost exclusively find that for example, what kind of schools do wealthy people send their children to? Wealthy people's children are not being sent to trade schools to learn how to be a welder or a plumber or an electrician or something like that. Wealthy people's children aren't going out to learn how to be a construction worker, a blue collar this or that, or work in a restaurant or something of that nature, at least not for an extended period of time. Wealthy people and their children are getting to enjoy the things that lie at the top of the pyramid, which are things that grant you meaning, things that grant you value in and of themselves, and not things that are instrumental. I work at a restaurant, and I've worked at a restaurant for over a decade solely because of instrumental means, because I need to pay my bills. I have no particularly intrinsic value to be found in working at a restaurant. My point is that you will find the children of wealthy people at the highest accoladed musical colleges, the highest accoladed dance colleges, the highest accoladed literary organizations, things of that nature, because that is the pillar of which they have reached the top of, and now that's all they have to worry about is finding that self-fulfillment.
Sure, I think you're right. I think in a sentence you're right, but I do think
Sure.
it's worth noting.
I'll take what I can get.
You'll take it, yeah. But I do want to bring up, while that is true, like what you just said is true, especially if you go to a place like like the Pacific Coast, like the West Coast here, but you're going to see a large proportion of like upper middle class Americans, and they're going to send their kids to go to college for like music, that sort of thing. You're also going to see, like, you're still going to see a lot of people being sent in to focus on becoming a lawyer or a tech bro, essentially, a technician of some sort. It's just entering a different color of work. I do think, like, what you've essentially established is that, like, at this stage. No, let me.
Go ahead.
No, please continue.
Yeah.
Here, and I'll finish with this, if Michael, please. But like you've established at a certain level, you get to a point where you allow for the flowering of self-actualization and those sorts of ideas. Like that's like you hit this moment where you could start to afford that sort of thinking. But I do think it's worth also noting that there are still like, imagine almost like a flower growing up and then out. Like there are still some people that focus on just producing more STEM, I suppose you could say, just the acquisition of more and more money.
So time out. That's a very good, place to be. I'm happy we got there. But 3 things as quickly as I can make them. All right. So you posed earlier the money in, money out argument. I'm right there on board with you. Why would I pay the government $300 in, get $250 back, blah blah blah. I just want to make sure we're in the same place. So, what I guess I'm asking is, right? Everything you said is true, right? We've got people in the upper class going to send their children into the upper class lifestyle. Hopefully, right? That's what they want for their children or whatever. But so if we're going to allow for, like upper and lower class like people in things like that, um, why are we differentiating it on money? I guess that is also a question. Like, for example, the census tells us that the poorest states for children are the poorest states for adults. Does this mean that there is an unseen variable, or is there a unified explanation? Generation to generation, they're not trading generational wealth, they're trading generational poverty. Do you see what I mean? Like, these people don't have the option to do what you're talking about in most cases. And then, as we concentrate stuff more and more into the hands of fewer people, that's what we're talking about. And so on. And then I'd like to address the money in, money out argument. So the other day, I'm watching. Hold on. The other day, I'm watching this short. Matthew Desmond. I just like to quote him real quick. He says $1 in benefits to like the lowest class of people gets you $62 return on investment. You're not putting in money and getting back what you paid in. You're getting more.
Right.
You're getting better roads, and you're getting better things, and so on.
What is that number coming from?
Well, so
Right.
like I said, I'm just quoting him, Michael. And look, okay. I'd like to, because I'm with GDP, you. Right, Mr. I'm with you, Michael. I'm like, dude, you did not give me enough context there. I need more data and so on. So look, then I said this. This is me talking. Let's assume he means over the course of a lifetime. Let's assume it's 10 times as less as he said. That's still a net gain on society. And then I said, okay, let's pretend like it's not a net gain. How is it America first for our children to, starve? I mean, like like the most basic shit, right? What all Americans ought to be able to agree on is, I'll end it with, this, that you don't have those options you're talking about if you can't have food in a country of excess food. I don't get it.
So one thing I'll just go ahead and slip in here and say is that this concept that you give 300 to the government and give 250 back, I mean, it's not something that I understand fully. And obviously we don't have the figures in front of us to discuss this, but as far as I'm aware, if the United States fully embraced a national healthcare system, like properly, as far as I'm aware, we would save money on
a lot
our healthcare expenditures.
Individually, yeah.
I think it is a pretty well-known fact that the United States spends far more than any other country on healthcare expenditures. And in fact, our healthcare quality is worse than other places that spend less than us. Now, I remember from reading a book called Sickening, I believe, that a lot of that has to do with sort of the nature of our or our socio-political, economic, whatever you want to call it, structure, and that we spend a lot of money in trying to discover new things. We do a lot of experimentation. We develop a lot of new products, and there's even more arguments to be made there in the sense of, pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies and all of that, but that's a completely different thing. My point being is that technically speaking, we should be saving money by doing this. And it's like, if I work a week and make $500 on a paycheck, I'm not giving $500 to the federal government. The federal government is taking a small percentage of that and adding it to a massive pool that is made up of everyone. I'm not losing the bulk of my paycheck. And even if $300 of the $500 that I made, more than half of the money that I made in that week went to the federal government, but that money guaranteed me housing, food, water, electricity, healthcare, these basic needs, that $200 is mine to do with what I please, to spend on gasoline for a private vehicle, to spend on clothing of my choice, to spend on any number of personal things that could not be argued to be necessitous to my physiological needs, but to something that I desire as a want.
Sure. I first want to say that like you're not going to find anyone who likes United Healthcare in this episode. I don't think. Like you're not gonna like I'm not gonna like try to argue in favor of any of that because I don't and I'm not. And I do actually think you're probably. It is worth noting that a huge amount of the money that goes into healthcare and why it is so expensive has a lot to do with the amount of lawyers and administrative roles that exists now between like healthcare profession,
kill all the
healthcare
lawyers.
System at large.
There's also an artificial scarcity of doctors in the U.S. because the medical association artificially limits how many doctors are produced each year.
I have to say, it is wildly difficult to become a doctor.
Yeah,
I do want to explore this a little bit with y'all, but I know two different people that have worked in my lab, and they are the hardest working people that I have ever met. And they have applied, both of them, more than once to get into med school, and they have not gotten in both of those times. So I know some people that are like med school is really, really, really quite difficult to get into. So I can only follow with what Michael's saying. Either way, it is worth exploring here. I mentioned this whole point about healthcare, and I want to give you more power here, Barry, to say that yes, like they literally are driving up expenses. Our current healthcare system at large, like it swells up all the time. It's swelling up right now. It's been doing it for decades. It's going to get worse. So that's a situation to take in tow. The thing that I was raising earlier, this whole point about spending $300 to get $250 back, I don't think those 2 points are necessarily in conflict. Like I can say to you that, you can say like the healthcare system that we have is broken. It's not working. It's too expensive compared to then if we just did it in this other system. I think you're probably right. I do. But I do think the idea of giving all of your money in so you can be given property, food, water, etc. Like if you want to apply that to everything, just like completely to the entire to your entire livelihood, I think that's where it somewhat breaks down. It's really dependent on the exact situation at large. I think it can be applicable to healthcare. I think it can be, especially given the elephantine nature of our healthcare system right now. But I don't think that it's necessarily so that if I give the government $1,500 a month and they give me back something, if it doesn't make sense to me in terms of logistics, unless you could show me the bare math, why not just keeping my own money in that particular instance would in fact be better for me in the long run. I would much rather just keep my money in most instances, unless you can then show me in that particular circumstance that it would in fact be worthwhile, such as healthcare.
Yeah. So roads, state apparatus that do invisible things that you benefit from every minute of your life. There's plenty of those. I'm not going to enumerate them here, but you can accept and understand that they exist. And because of that, I would almost argue we kind of need to like point them out to people because people are apparently not aware of how much.
Michael, they're not aware of them until they go away.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Potholes and suddenly. No. Well, first off, I always sound like I really don't mean to come off like a libertarian whenever we do these things.
I think it's part of your upbringing. I don't blame you for it.
Oh, all right. Thanks. I really don't mean to, but at the same time, I read Atlas
Shrugged in high school. Trust me, I've been there.
I can only say that being a libertarian is in fact ridiculous. I don't think it works. I mean, you need firefighters, etc. You need you do in fact need stuff. What I would say is there should be some movement towards fiscal responsibility as we provide more and more stuff. I mean, this comes all the way back to the very first thing I said at the beginning. As we move towards this, I don't know, whatever trajectory it is, but towards this, let's say, Star Trek trajectory, as we provide more and more resources and things become easier and easier to acquire, I do think as we will move that direction. I do think that that is possible. But I think as we get there, I'm basically being the voice in this podcast right now. I'm only trying to innovate this perspective for you. But while you take steps to be that way, you should be an efficient, productive system with fiscal responsibility. That's really all I'm saying here. Provide these things, but within the confines of the fiscally responsible state.
So I would just like to interject one little thing here, Michael, before you go gather your thoughts. So Trevor, you know what? I'm gonna let you in on a very private thought I've been having for a couple weeks now. Literally just 2 or 3, and I have grown up my whole life knowing that Social Security is doomed to fail. Like being firm in my belief that it's going to just completely bankrupt the country and everything else. And only here very recently have I been told, by trustworthy, things that it's in no danger of failure, and that it will fail in something I can't remember the exact number, but it will fail in decades if we don't do anything right now. But it'll just become a little harder every year to do something about it until we get there. But it'll be decades before the trust runs out of money. So what we're trying to say is, it's kind of like you're paying it forward. I mean, that's literally what you're doing. You're paying it forward, and it's competing against, things like inflation for you.
Well, I think, and even this may be a good point now that we've crossed the hour mark, to sort of bring the conversation back and sort of take a step back in the conversation and talk about government responsibility. Because, for example, like my mother, speaking of Social Security, my mother is 63 years old, barring a bunch of lengthy family history to explain why I'm 27 and my mother is 63. You don't need to know the details, just know that that's the case. And she is sort of beholden on Social Security, even now, she won't even be able to draw on even what you could consider remotely adequate amount until she's 70 years old. And even then, it's going to be tough to live on that. I mean, consider the costs of rent anywhere in the United States, really. If you aren't already owning a home that you've paid off, or a car that you've paid off, or any of number of these things, I mean, if you've been living your entire life working 2 jobs like she has just to get by and have even a minuscule amount of self-fulfillment or time off to enjoy the precious moments that you have that are fleeting on this planet before you die forever, I mean,
yeah, I get the pathos of this whole thing, but I really want to cut off the pathos, actually, because it's not particularly prescient or relevant to arguments on statecraft, other than appealing to citizenry.
Because at the end of the day,
reading The Prince.
I think
I did read that in high school, but I read it as satire. That's a different conversation. I want to actually avoid talking about specific areas, and I want to spin a very wildly different mental model of government, which is to say, you're in a club, you're paying membership, you should sure as fuck get something out of it.
That's a good one.
And your voting that you do, we vote. When you have membership dues in a club, you get voting rights, right? You get say so on what gets passed and what doesn't. And what I want to kind of radically say here is if you can certainly think of that model. I think especially people who get up in arms about, oh, well, I don't want such demographic benefiting from my tax dollars. That's very much the model that they may be occupying. I don't actually like that model, And I think that model kind of sucks because it's thinking about it from the view of the citizenry. And the citizenry is not actually the body that makes those decisions. Even the idea itself does not come from the citizenry. That model comes from the aristocracy or whoever's in charge, filtering down into the citizenry, just like all ideas do. The citizenry does not come up with ideas. That's just not a thing. Now, some intelligentsia might be part of the citizenry, and they might have like ideas that go against the grain and that can like promulgate and bubble up. But for the most part, the state apparatus or the people in charge of the state apparatus are the ones who put out different ideas about how the state is or should be. So, I think
so you're not talking about things like innovation. I mean,
about what?
Like innovation.
No, I think what I think he means to say is he's not talking about like what to quote the social contract, the general will of the people. It is more of the.
I don't think they have a general will. Yeah. So my argument is that the general will of the people is ineffectual and directionless because of their actual current status. The majority of them are working day to day, 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And they don't have the wherewithal, the energy, or anything like that to be creative enough to actually think about these things. So everything that they believe in is merely a parroting coming down from the intelligentsia of the era. My point in pointing this out is that any arguments towards pathos are just there to be PR moves to get votes. So I don't really want to touch on them because I think they're basically useless to talk about. You can run in circles. You can parrot back and forth all the little ideological niches, and you're not going to get anywhere. What I want to actually focus on is statecraft and the idea of why would you want your citizenry to not excel or even at the lowest reaches be well taken care of? And I think there are actually very intentional reasons why you wouldn't.
So, and I want to say this real quick.
Well, you can't just say that and then not say any of them at all. Like, what is this?
So let me get this straight, just real quick. We're going to go through some reasons why the state, like the big capital S state, the hypothetical, body of the government, how and why could it benefit whenever its citizens do not prosper?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Making sure we're on the same page.
Because the state is not we say the state. What that in fact is like a bunch of people who are the ruling class, right? That's the actuality of the situation. The state is this weird abstraction that we use to talk about them collectively, but like their disparate movements as individuals and their desires as individuals are just that. They are human beings making decisions about how you and I prosper or die in the state apparatus. Okay? So why would you want, so to turn it on its head, why would you want a citizenry that is suffering if you have what is effectively a limitless supply insofar as like fulfilling basic needs of resources? And I can tell you like a really cynical way of looking at it, which is that, but it's because like if people were doing too well, they might get a little bit too, what's the word people like to use? Entitled to not working 80 hours a week or not work. Like you lose speed. And when you lose speed, other people can outpace you by abusing their people in their state. And so at a national power level, it makes more sense
geopolitics.
To force the bottom area of people who have no power to push against you, to constantly be in a state of either fatigue or exhaustion or whatever you want to call it from excess work, and then to like keel over nicely at their end of life and not bother you while you're ruling the state and maintaining sovereignty. Now that's a really cynical take. But I'll ask you, what about that is different from what you see right now?
Right. Well, I think first and foremost, I do think there's value to your perspective. I do like the way that you've constructed it. It's from like in so many words. It's like if you establish sort of a red queen paradigm for the people in the lower rungs of society. People who don't know, like a Red Queen situation is when you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. That's a Red Queen paradigm. By putting a huge swath of the population in the Red Queen paradigm, you can create a situation that can generate huge amounts of productivity and generation of power and force out of the populace. And then you brought in sort of a geopolitical lens there, which kind of makes me imagine like the lens of like Russia versus the United States versus China, Iran, etc. Like this geopolitical game space. Now, I do think that there's value to the way that you're visualizing reality here, Michael. I do, and I do think you can actually pull a lot with it. But I also want to put to you, like you used very strong words at the beginning of your point of view, such as like ideas are from the intelligentsia and from the aristocracy and so forth. And I would say that while your perspective has value, it is worth noting that there are many other perspectives and many other narratives, all interweaving, interlocking, and pivoting and goose hopping all at the same time. And they all have varying degrees of validity given there's so many variable ways at which to measure reality. I think it's necessarily so that while you are correct, there are other disparate perspectives that are getting at completely different things that are also totally valid, totally correct. Yeah. Such as like you could say like so and so the American dream. Like I can tell you right now that like my family, like both on my mom and my dad's side, came from very working class, and they actually do really quite well now. Like they've worked really, really hard, and like through their narrative or through their perspective, like the American dream is alive and well. It is. They started from a position where they made very, very little money, doing very little with a very large family, just always being tight on money, and now they're doing very well for themselves, and they're on their way up, I guess you could say. Like their stars are rising or whatever. So I think that it is valid in that instance, and it's also completely invalid from another reference point, and from this reference point, and from that. Like there's many different bits of evidence available to you all at the same time, and you can create these huge grandscape ways of approaching reality. But I would only point out just one small thing, Michael, and that is I don't think you're from the aristocracy, and you are in fact full of ideas.
So Trevor, one thing I would like to say real quick. I'm happy you put it in that way, but here's the thing that me and Bray are trying to say earlier. I think a quick search on Google suggests that most millionaires and billionaires are self-made. Okay, so fine. I don't necessarily believe that. But fine, okay. But exactly 0% of them starved and got sick and died because they're alive. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is that, like, I understand what Michael's trying to say about how, we can have a system, and you can cynically look at it like, okay, there has to be this more or less arbitrary underclass that we have that supports this society and so on and pressures things to move or whatever. But I mean, what if we all know about it, Michael? What if we live in a world of instant communication as we do? What then? What is the future of government responsibility? That's my last question. I mean, what if we all know about what you're talking about, Michael? What if we're all ridiculously educated because of the way we are?
Well, information's so cheap now with social media. Like the fact
so
that
if we all know about it,
yeah.
then this system, this paradigm,
ideas,
as Trevor would say, would no longer work.
Yeah. So my ideas don't really mean a hill of beans in the grand scheme of things, because I don't have the will to power to enact
that's
them.
fine. But what I'm saying is that,
and so that's just to answer Trevor.
Right, right. But if we all know about what you're talking about, I mean, for God's sake, I'm an author. All right, I write my stuff, and anyway, long story short, in this creative writing thing that I have been working on for a long time now, it actually has what you're talking about, a government that keeps an underclass of people, where they are, to do what you're talking about. I mean, and
As a
your thoughts must have come from sources. We've known about this for too long. I think that kind of bottom is going to drop out, as Trevor would say.
I think, like Michael, I think you are actually more powerful than you know. I mean, who was like Vladimir Lenin living in Vienna, other than like a bearded, pondering guy feeling quite powerless but quite serious about his intentions.
Was he not? What was his class background? Because he's in Vienna. Vienna was like one of the like core areas of the HRE. Like, this is not a small town to be in. I'm just curious. I don't actually know.
If we want to explore whether or not Vladimir Lenin was an aristocrat, I guess we could. I guess we could explore that.
It's
but
a relevant
I would,
question because Marx certainly was.
Sure. I only bring all of this up to say that there are in fact cases like what we call the aristocracy is in fact an aristocracy. It is, but people exit and enter it all the time. That's one of the reasons why millionaires are very often, as you read, Stefan, like self-made. It's not because like you have to be like only hardworking people. Well, part of it is like hardworking people can get to that level of degree by just constantly pushing and all that. But another thing is you can that's not always what it is. But
you need connections.
Yes, you do. I agree.
You need to be good at looking for opportunity. And
You're absolutely right. You can't just be fantastic at making pencils. You have to
a big word that starts with the letter
E. You need enough stability on the hierarchy of needs to start looking at opportunities and making moves and having the confidence to make those moves.
Right. Of course, certainly. I only mean to bring all this up to say it's also extremely easy to piss away all that money as well. Which is one of the reasons why it does in fact fluctuate. I'm only trying to illustrate a sort of picture of what the aristocracy looks like. It's not a family. It's not a whole bunch of Vanderbilts and Carnegies, although they are there. It's just worth noting that there is a fluctuating noise of people getting into it from having those exact traits that Michael has just mentioned. And then many people, I have met people, I know people that I have a weird story, but I knew a guy who was a pizza delivery guy. When I delivered pizza, like in the middle of high school, and like literally we just got talking, and I found out that he lives in Starwood, or like his parents are from Starwood, and that's, if you don't know anyone in North Texas, that's a very well-to-do area. And he essentially, through a series of bad decisions, found himself working at a pizza delivery place. You can piss through all of that money as you adopt it. This thing is like, it's not solid, but it's quite noisy.
So Trevor, here's my question there for you. All right, to help you see it the way that I'm seeing it just right now. All right, because like I've been thinking about this so much for weeks, and so if you have an equilibrium situation of any kind whatsoever, right? You've got a distribution of elements, whatever those elements are, that establish this kind of rate of people going in and out of the aristocracy, for your example, right? So there's like this kind of equilibrium of who are the aristocrats. It's constantly changing, but like there are only so many of them, right? There's kind of only so many spots. You know what I'm saying? And so would it disturb you if you looked at any other equilibrium situation and saw that the elements up at the top weren't going anywhere, and the elements at the bottom weren't going anywhere either? And that's the way I'm looking at this. With our economy, we have so much, disparity right now, just like Michael's talking about, where we have what should be, if you left it up to random chance, as you're, kind of espousing, not all the way espousing, but at least talking about, we should see them moving up and down more. That's what we're saying. And we don't.
I would, I'd need to see data. This is
But
just one of those
so
things.
just by virtue of the massive collected wealth of the the top ones. I mean,
Yeah,
there you
I think
go.
it does stand for itself. The fact that, I mean, it's like, when people make money, it doesn't just come from thin air. It's like that money has to come from somewhere. And in our particular situation, we are describing a mass accumulation, a hoarding of wealth by a very small number of people at the very top of the food chain in the country. And that money is coming from somewhere, and it is coming from
It's
everybody
coming from
below
us.
them.
And so and what I'm trying to say there is, um, it's so obvious whenever you look at Russia and how they just accumulated all this vast, like, just Smaug levels of wealth. And now we are where we are with them.
I would like to say this while we are in a little bit of a floating zone towards the end of the episode. One of the most important things to me from reading the Second Bill of Rights, and with its many excerpts of speeches and sayings from Franklin, or I'll just say FDR, and keep in mind while I say that this is a particular time in American history where a president sort of rose to the table in the wake of the Great Depression. It's kind of what may still be and was our sort of reference point for like one of the lowest economic points in American history. And people were in bread lines and doing all sorts of things to survive and get by. And
we know that it happened about 100 years ago. You know what I'm
right,
saying?
really not
Well,
that long
well,
ago.
we
Really,
had grandparents that were in it, type of
exactly.
situation.
I mean, I remember the stories from my great grandparents' parents
Exactly.
talking about the things that they would do. They never threw anything away, like even
Yep.
grease left in the pan when they were cooking, they saved and put in the refrigerator.
Mhm.
Like, my point being is that this was a time in American history where it was like the call for basic necessities to be provided for the American people could not have been a better point to bring these things up. But one of my favorite
And then FDR
takeaways
won
was
4 terms about it
right
through a war.
was a quote from FDR. Basically, it's a super simple quote that necessitous men are not free men. If you are needing for something, you are not free. And I thought about that as soon as Michael started talking about how, the general will really has no power. It's all about the aristocracy.
I
And what
just
I
don't.
mean is if you are a needing person, if you are worried from day to day about where you're getting your basic needs from, or how you're going to make a payment on XYZ that has to do with your basic needs, what kind of time do you have to consider who you're voting for in the next election, or making it to every election cycle, or even organizing, which is really what it's going to take to make some fundamental change at large? I mean, even consider a situation that I have personally, which I have beef with the DNC. Okay. Like, I think there needs to be
Substantial.
fundamental party changes
There needs to be a
in the
complete
DNC,
reformation,
or an entirely new party. This is an entirely different conversation. But what I
which
mean to
we should
say
do
is that
next.
I alone, as an individual, just casting a vote for something can do very little. If I want time to dedicate myself towards actually organizing with other people and getting resources together and being active and doing something, I need time. I need to not be worrying about my basic needs. That needs to be an afterthought. That way, the bulk of my time goes towards bettering, or at least what I believe to be bettering, the country and my nation for everyone. But how could I possibly do that if I'm, say, working 2 full-time jobs and I get one, maybe 1.5 days off? And, whenever I'm not working, I'm trying to recover from working so that I can go work again. So just so that I can use that money to buy food, to buy water, to pay for the roof over my head, which is
How
an
are you expected
extravagant
to
amount.
keep up?
Yeah, how can I expect to keep up? Red Queen, like Trevor is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean,
And
that's why we do representation. we are, a democratic
right, which
republic.
is so funny to me. And again,
It's
about
just
the
that
social
our
contract.
republic, has uh, is betraying us. That's what I'm trying to say. Like,
And
Bray,
go ahead, Trevor.
I wanted to mention, this is completely a tangent, but if you do get the chance, I highly suggest you check out this song. It's from Talking Heads, particularly their live version of this song from their one. If you look up "Stop Making Sense," that's what the live tour is called, the live album. It's called "Life During Wartime."
Oh,
Go listen.
yeah.
Oh my god! Like specifically that live version. Like if you want to really
very
get into this whole
popular.
prospect of just running, like I work at the nighttime, I work in the daytime, I might not ever get home.
Right.
It's such a good song, and I don't know why, but the tangent you're going on right now,
It's
it
a
really
decades
rings.
old issue. I mean, and
Uh,
even you can
And we're
and
tired
this
of
is the
it.
great thing about reading theory and all of this stuff about, all history is just the hitherto class struggle. It's been there. It has been there. And it is only now in which we have unlimited nearly access to information that regular ordinary people like us can sit down and have conversations. I mean, this is the essence of what I believe Rousseau's talking about in the things like the general will, is that it's just ordinary people, regular people, all coming together despite their differences and saying, what actually benefits all of us? What do we actually all need in order to live a decent life? And that's kind of what we're talking about here. What is the government's responsibility? What is the general will enacted? It's responsibility, and it's what we can agree on as a people that is beneficial for everyone. I can't tell you how many times I've read a document or a piece of literature or anything pertaining to the function of government that contains a line about uphold the well-being of its citizens, and you have to do nothing more than look no further than defining well-being for a human being that looks very similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in understanding that this, even if it is not enshrined in our Constitution, should be enveloped in some sort of document like the Second Bill of Rights to aspire towards fulfilling for every citizen, or even, like I said early in the episode, anybody who resides here, and that's all I mean to say is that we could be doing so much more in this country, but we are pretty much enslaved to the production to the circulation of capital almost exclusively upwards, and to the military war complex, the industrial war complex, industrial whatever you want to call it.
Look, people, look. I very much want to end with Bray there. I'm glad he got the last word. So I'll send us off, right, with again, you have to take care of each other, and I mean, I don't know, like we talked about it. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to take care of each other,
because the state won't.
Yeah, really. But like in the context of what we're talking about the responsibility of the state, the state should be us. I really believe that. Yeah, um, it's kind of really old how we're being completely moved around by people by virtue of just a green merciless god, money. I'm tired of it, and I want you to know that if you're tired of it too, that you're just not alone. And like I told Michael earlier, that the end of the day, at the end of the day, how do we take care of each other? We get educated. Education is power, and the more power we have, the better. Right? Have a good one.